Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Arapidas, and I'm here on behalf of the marketing team with School Health. I'd like to thank you for joining us today and participating in our Air Purification. It is more than just clean air educational session. Joining us today are Caitlin McGill and Dr. Ray Heipp. Before I turn the time over to Caitlin, I would like to review a few quick things about today's session. We will not be taking audio questions, but you can submit your questions via the Questions Interface tab in GoToWebinar. You can submit your questions anytime during the presentation. Our presenters, Caitlin and Dr. Ray, will take about 30 minutes for this presentation. If there is time, we will take questions in the order that they were received. This educational session will be recorded and a link to it will be posted on the schoolhealth.com website. We will email the link to you for future playback. If you are having technical difficulties with the audio or visual portion of today's session, please call GoToWebinar directly at 855-352-9003. That number once again is 855-352-9003. And now let's turn the time over to Caitlin.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Air Purification. It's more than just clean air, and that title says it all. I want to thank you for your time and welcome you to our presentation. Dr. Ray and I are going to be walking you through what is more than just clean air. And now to Dr. Ray to kick it off.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate it. Thank you for the intro, Alex, and welcome, everyone. You know, it's always very interesting when we start having discussions within our schools about the whole idea of air purification. So many people think, oh, I've got the answer. I know exactly what it is. What we're going to talk about today is something a little bit different because air purification is so much more. It's not necessarily a discussion we've had in education over the years. Why is that? Well, the idea of the air in our schools oftentimes focused on air conditioning and heating. So basically the HVAC systems. It didn't really focus on what was in the air. You know, those of us who come from a different generation, a different day and age in education are going to remember a couple of things. One of the things we may remember is that in many of our schools, if we go back to the 70s and even into the early and mid 80s, there were smoking areas within the schools. There were areas within our faculty lounges that were also designated as smoking, or the faculty lounge as a whole was a smoking area. And we want to make sure that we're not looking at anything in particular when we talk air purification, because it is so much more. So we're going to go through what air purification is all about in this day and age, what we maybe have missed out on over the course of generations, and we are going to talk, don't worry, about ESSER funding too and how it's actually going to provide for things along the way. So I want to start by talking about what is in our air, what goes on within it that really air purification actually helps to take care of. You know, we think when we talk about purified air, strictly what's been going on with COVID. We think about bacteria and viruses that may be out there, but that's not it. That's not the only thing that we have. You know, we want to think too about those areas where we've got school buildings that actually are in zones that really have a lot of allergens in the air. Think about those times, whether it be springtime or even at points in the fall, when suddenly the pollen counts raise through the roof. I know in some of the classrooms I've taught in over the years, you'll end up with yellow pollen dust coating desks and tables in the teacher's area. And simply wiping it down doesn't eliminate the pollen from the air. What happens at a different point in time where maybe the cottonwood comes into bloom? It can be very beautiful, but it can also cause a lot of serious allergic reactions. So too, odors. You know, it's funny that we put odors on there because immediately so many of us go to, oh, you mean the locker rooms? No, not just that. Something we're always thinking about when it comes to odors is the bad ones. There's good odors too that might come in. Think about during the spring when just outside in the fields. Someone's going through and actually mowing the fields, cutting the grass around the school building. That could be a really nice smell, except for those that have grass as an allergen. Oh, and by the way, those lawnmowers, the tractors that are doing the work in the fields, those are also kicking out some emissions as well. These are all things that we want to take a look at, and why air purification really is much more than just saying, oh, it's protecting us from viruses. Oh, it's just clean air. So we don't want to fixate on one issue in general. Instead, what we want to know is that the research has told us, and this is research that's been done in not just our classrooms, but also in any type of workplace area. Indoor air is 2 to 5 times, quote unquote, dirtier than air on the outside. So be aware of that as we're going through. So what does that all actually mean? And what does this air purification idea create environmentally within the classroom? Well, the chart we've got at the top there really shows what happens specifically with flu when you've got an air purifier working in the backgrounds. This was chosen by Caitlin and I because of something that happens every single year. Doesn't matter what year, but it happens, and that's cold and flu season. Think about it. How many times have we been, especially in October, November, things are changing, and one child comes in and then suddenly that flu is spreading? Well, this just takes a look at the flu and what happens when you've got an air purifier versus not necessarily having any air purifiers whatsoever. And what ends up happening is a significant reduction in that flu. The air purifiers are really pulling it right out of the air. The mistake that we've made throughout the context of our educational careers is to say, you know what, all we've got to do is wipe things down and everything will be fine. What I like to share with different groups with whom I'm working is this idea. We don't want to look at our classrooms simply as saying, oh, if we wipe everything down with our Lysol wipes or we spray some Lysol into corner areas, everything's taken care of. No, you know what? Those surface germs are taken care of. However, when you look at a classroom as a whole, when you look at the nurse's office, when you look at a gymnasium, we have a unique feature that we haven't tended to think about in the past. When you, for those of us who've gone out there and have bought a home or rented an apartment, one of the things we look for is square footage. And sometimes we see some things where, man, that square footage is almost too good to be true. And you walk into that apartment or you walk into that house and they've got 15-foot vaulted ceilings and it's just, what a gorgeous entryway. And then you walk in and all the rooms are really, really small. And you're going, wait, where's all this space? Well, all the space is back there in that beautiful entryway with 15-foot vaulted ceilings. That's our classrooms. We don't recognize sometimes that there is actually more space air-wise than there is with actual desks and cabinets and textbooks. So just simply wiping things down is not enough. So much of the area in our classrooms, in our nurses' offices, anywhere, especially in a gymnasium, is simply air. An air purification system allows us to make sure we're taking care of all those contaminants that may be there in the air. Why haven't we thought about this in the past? Well, we really haven't been informed enough. We haven't done some of the studies that have actually taken us to the ability to understand why it's so important to have air purification. And a mistake that's been made for many years is to sit there and say, oh, air conditioning, we've got air conditioning, that takes care of everything. No, it doesn't. It doesn't have the same type of filters that a true air purification system has. Again, some of us came from the old days where air conditioning meant you opened your classroom door in the windows and you hoped that the teacher across the hallway did the same thing, and then the wind had come through and that was air conditioning. What we're talking about here is the ability to have air circulating that's being cleaned and refreshed on a regular basis. In the past, we just didn't know. It's not that we were trying purposefully to have, contaminants in the air or anything. We just weren't aware, but now we are. And now we have the ability to make some changes that are going to set the tone for our school buildings for years to come. I have this question asked of me, especially from administrators and school boards all the time. But isn't the pandemic already over? Why do we need to do stuff like this? Can't we spend our funds in other ways? Well, you can spend your funds any way that you want. There's so many great things that you can be doing when it comes to things like school nursing supplies, when it comes to some things like AEDs that you may be putting into your buildings. However, let's make sure we stick with the facts. Is the pandemic over? It's called an endemic now. What does that mean? Guess what? This stuff's going to visit us on a regular basis, and we're seeing different variants coming in. Cold and flu season is still going to be with us every single year. And so what we're looking at is not just the pandemic. Remember a few slides ago, we said we can't fixate on something. We need to look holistically. And those of you who've heard me before, yes, I'm using the H word, holistic. But if we're not doing that for our students and our faculty and staff, we're not really making sure we have the healthiest of environments. Indoor air quality, we have to look at that. I know that sounds strange. Normally when we hear about air quality, we're hearing that weather person say, oh, the air quality index today is this because of pollutants or because of pollen or something else on the outside. Indoor air quality is even more important. Why? Because it's a determining factor for how our individuals, not just our students, but also our faculty and staff are interacting within that environment. So when we talk about focusing on a healthy environment, we've got to include all aspects of things. I love these pictures off to the side. These are actual pictures from Culver Academy in Indiana. Culver actually has air purification already in all areas, but the top picture I love the most because it's a locker room, and having air purification in there is not just about the odors that might come out of a locker room. It's also about the viruses, the bacteria, and so many of the things that go on. A locker room oftentimes is a place where if you're hosting an event, other teams will use. So you've got other groups coming in too. There are different groups. During the day, your physical education classes may be using these areas. So you've got to be aware of these things. When we focus on a healthy environment, look at every aspect of your buildings. Well, I've also had some administrators reach out and say, listen, you know what? That's great. We're okay with just the air conditioner. We're okay with, what we're doing right now. We'll just open windows. What Caitlin and I have done for you, and you will be getting these slides as you heard Alex say earlier. We have the reference guide from the United States Environmental Protection Agency that we'll be sharing with you, the link to it, where it looks at things for our schools, not just like exhaust and the whole idea of air cleaning, but why indoor air quality is so important and how it can be measured. You know what? When we look at some of the air purification devices which are available to us today, we want to recognize that some of them have built in already the ability to analyze just on a quick basis how clean our rooms might be. You know, one of the ones that comes to mind, and if you do have questions, again, Caitlin and I can help you with this, but the PureView AirMax AM actually has a built-in sensor, which I think is great. It just, you know, it reminds me a lot of a vacuum cleaner when it's picking up the dirt and suddenly it goes from a red light or a yellow light to a green light saying, hey, things are working. That's what we want to be aware of. We want to make sure that, again, we're creating these environments no matter where we're at. And that's a key phrase that it's going to lead into our next part, but we want to create these environments no matter where we're at, so that, again, we are doing things in a healthy way. You know, some of the things that we don't necessarily think about when we think about our indoor areas and we think about this idea of air purification is something that we learned in biology, is something that even younger students in the elementary levels learn. We breathe in oxygen, and we breathe out carbon dioxide. Guess what happens? You've got a classroom of 25 students and a teacher. Well, there's both oxygen and carbon dioxide that are going out. So air purification also adjusts to that. Have you ever been in an overcrowded room where it's a little bit warmer and suddenly within the next few minutes you start to feel kind of drowsy? Well, if the air isn't as pure as it can be, we're actually inhaling almost as much carbon dioxide as we are oxygen coming in. And it's just our body processing it. That's another reason, not just because the presenter might be boring, so hopefully most of you are still awake, but that's another reason why sometimes air quality indoors is not as strong as it is outdoors. Outdoors, our breaths out just get carried away in the winds. Indoors, they sit. So we want to be aware of that too. This is more than just looking again at specific aspects. This is looking at a holistic way that allows our individuals to learn better. Now, when I spoke before about being able to bring air purification anywhere, sometimes we forget a number of different things. Those of us who've taught in older buildings, I was in a building that was almost 100 years old when I was teaching back in the 80s and early 90s. One of the unique things about that building was it was obviously made to last, but you had areas that did not have ventilation for HVAC. So during the winter months, it was really cold in there. During the summer months, it was really hot in there. So we still have some areas in our school buildings that may not have a lot of great ventilation. We also have, and I've been working with a lot of coaches on this, we also have times where our students may be quote unquote outside, but we have the need for tents, cross country, track, even soccer. You may have some team tents off to the side, or for cross country and track, you may have officials tents, especially during rain or snow in inclement weather. And those flaps are down. And guess what happens? You've got everybody on top of each other. We've got itinerant teachers, we've got itinerant nurses, we've got itinerant therapists going from place to place, and they don't know what the air conditions will be as they're working with individuals. So here's what we want to consider too as we go through. What about portability? Here in the background, and you haven't heard it, even though it's turned on, I've got a portable air purifier going right now. These are great because it really creates a bubble of around 200 square feet. Not huge, but for the area I'm in right now, this is perfect. The same thing for these tents, the same thing for a smaller conference room where you might be meeting one-on-one with an individual. It's easy for our itinerant teachers and nurses and therapists to carry with them in a car from place to place. And guess what you're doing? You're creating, again, that healthy environment no matter where you are at. And you notice that it's not creating a distraction, because I know that that's something that a lot of us have felt along the way. Now, I want to give you the opportunity to hear from Caitlin too. She's going to share with you her perspective as a parent as to why air purification is so important. So Caitlin?
Thank you, Dr. Ray. I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to speak today on the call. A little bit about me. I'm the product manager over health services. So I'm very aware of air purification. I have a passion for it. It's what I do every day. But I have a different perspective. I also have 2 kids that come first. I have a 6-year-old son in 1st grade, and I have a 2.5-year-old daughter who's in daycare right now. So for my daughter, for example, she's what we call a COVID baby. She was born in the height of COVID when there was no visitors and no one could be at the hospital or see her or touch her. And as I'm now transitioning her into preschool, I'm seeing that a lot of these kids have never been in these environments at all around other kids. And so it's extra important. There's a heightened awareness walking out of COVID saying my kid is going to be exposed to germs that they've never seen before, that they've never been around. And so as a parent, it's very important to make sure that my children are in the safest environments they possibly can be. And we don't want them getting sick. We don't want any of us getting sick. And it goes just far beyond COVID. My daughter, for example, has been in a home daycare. And in her 1st year there, within a 3-month period, she had COVID, RSV, and hand, foot, and mouth, all within a 3-month period. And so to me, I went, is there anything I can do to heighten the level of cleanliness in the air? Because RSV, a kid coughs, and as Dr. Ray pointed out, they clean the surface areas, they disinfect, they use Lysol and wipes and sprays. But when a kid coughs and it goes into the air, all the other children around are exposed to it. So air purification is incredibly important. And then for my son, who's in a 1st grade classroom, I want to make sure that he's safe for himself and so that he's not bringing anything home to his little sister. He's exposing the family. So it goes beyond just the student, it's the entire community. My son, for example, does very well with structure. And so when he's in a classroom with a teacher that he knows and the nurse that he knows and the therapist that he knows, when he works with them, he has a wonderful day. And that just exudes through the entire day. He has a wonderful day, he has a wonderful evening. But on days when his teacher gets sick and he has a substitute, that throws off his day. And I can only imagine all the other kids, the 25 kids in his classroom, that are now thrown off by this as well. Our children thrive in structure. And so we want to keep our children safe, but we also want to keep the staff safe, our teachers safe, our nurses safe, because ourselves and our children really rely on us. So for me, this comes from a place from my heart, as well as a place of wanting to make sure that we're doing everything possible to keep our communities safe. Again, Dr. Ray, thank you so much for letting me speak my perspective here. And I know you're going to walk us through the perspective of a teacher.
Yes, thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate that. And your perspective is so essential here because sometimes, again, we forget to hear that parent's voice as we go in. So our friends over at Fellows actually conducted a study this past fall and shared with us these results, and they're spot on. Those of us who have looked at this understand this. 97% of all teachers believe that air quality impacts the performance of the students. Yes, it does. If you're in an uncomfortable room, you're not going to be able to focus. You're not going to be able to do your best. 89% of our teachers out there are concerned that the air quality of their classrooms adversely affects those with allergies. So we want to keep that in mind too. How can we keep our students, again, not only comfortable, but away from experiencing some difficulties along the way? And ironically, only 23% of the teachers in this study rated the air quality of their classrooms as good or excellent. What does that mean? It means we've got a long way to go, at least from the minds of the teachers. And I want to shift now from the minds of the teachers to the minds of an administrator. So one of the things we want to be aware of when we want to remember that is that, first and foremost, if a child misses 2 or more days per month over the course of an academic year, it actually increases their chances of not graduating by 86%. That's 2 or more days. What happens when we've got students who are out for lengthy periods of time, even if they're the best students? Sometimes it's not easy for them to get caught up. So the health and safety issue of the students is of the utmost importance. What happens though too when we have faculty and staff who can't be in there? That's another serious issue. And as I talk to my colleagues throughout the country, they're experiencing that not only when the kids come in are the kids missing days, but the faculty is too. And they want to do everything they can to be in there. But how do we stay up? How do we maintain that consistency of which we've talked about before? So in order to maintain overall health and looking at it from a community standpoint, we want to take a look at air purification because, again, when we don't look at and fixate on just COVID, when we look at it and say air purification helps the allergies, the bacteria and other viruses, it helps with some of the things that we're not necessarily aware of when it comes to air contaminants, then we're going to be able to create those environments where we've got one less thing to worry about. One more thing that says, hey, our schools are leading the way when it comes to being healthy. So the next thing I want to do is I want to talk about some do's and don'ts. Please sit down. Feel free to reach out to Caitlin and myself, to your school health rep, to see what is going to best suit your needs. It might be something very simple. It might be something a little more detailed, but we'll talk to you. We'll ask questions. You want to understand that there's no one size fits all. I wish there were, but there's not, because all of our school buildings are different. Our areas are different. You know, what's going on in the air outside is different. Please don't just run down to the local big box hardware store and buy a bunch of consumer units. I actually had a colleague who contacted me in the fall. She was leading a committee at her school. The principal had done this the year before, just ran out, got a bunch of units, and they weren't working. They continued to see issues. And so I sent her a bunch of research, said whatever we can do. They did their research. They felt that they wanted a full building unit. They brought it before the board. The board said, either a full building unit or maybe we get units, but air purification is important. Let's make sure we do it right. And then she called me just before Christmas, almost in tears, and said the principal did it again. He ran down to the local big box, bought additional units and said, these are just as good. Just put it diagonal from the other one. It'll be fine. They're still having issues even now with outbreaks of colds, of flus, of different contaminants. So please talk to somebody. We are here to support you, and you don't have to do this alone. Remember, the largest area of any room is the air around it. Funding. I know you've been waiting for this one. I have taken this literally from the actual bill that went through and was approved by our federal government. It is HR 1319, Section 2001, E2 O&P. If you are taking this back to your financial directors, to your administration, give them this information. Right there, it says you can use your ESSER funds for air purification, along with other improvements that you can make and other things that we can do to support you. This is the slide you want to hand to them. It says it all right there. What about outside of schools? Check with your local environmental health standards. There may be some grants that you're also able to get. Nonprofit agencies, consider donor-funded campaigns. You know, you're trying to create healthy access to programs, making sure that when individuals come into your program, they are protected, they are safe. Analyze your needs. Take a look long-term, what you may want to be doing. Use your ESSER funds now, and it sets you up where in the future you're worried only about maybe getting filters or having checks on the units as they go in. So those are some things you can be doing right now outside of ESSER funds as we move forward. Why are you doing this? It really is for your own and your school community's protection and peace of mind. We've got the funding available for us now. This is funding we have never seen and funding that's going to run out soon enough. Protect our kids, protect our schools, protect our faculty, our staff, and everything we stand for. Let our kids learn in a healthy environment. They've got enough things to worry about. We can only control that which we can control, and air purification is an area that we can control. I promised Caitlin I would get off my soapbox at some point, but some final thoughts. Find those experts that you are comfortable working with. Understand that air purification is not a quote unquote pandemic only response, but a response for a truly holistic and healthy environment. And again, think holistically. This is for everyone who walks into your buildings and walks out. There's a peace of mind that they can leave with. Now, normally, except in, of course, my sessions, you'd be aware that we'd have time for questions, but my timer shows me that, yes, we are about out of time. I want to thank you for being here with us today. Know that Caitlin and I are here to support you, and I want to turn things back over to Caitlin to wrap things up. So thank you, everyone. Caitlin?
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Again, I want to thank the audience for your time, your patience, and your understanding as we work through all of these different issues we have. Air purification no longer needs to be one of them. I'm happy to be a resource. You have my email. Please reach out with any questions, concerns. We have products to address all the different varieties of schools and buildings and facilities that you work in. So please use us as a resource. And again, thank you and have a wonderful day.